So how does Hitler's Barbarossa and Putin's special operation compare? After the fall of France, Hitler ordered plans to be drawn up for an invasion of the Soviet Union. He intended to destroy what he saw as Stalin's Jewish Bolshevist regime and establish Nazi dominance. The conquest and enslavement of the Soviet Union's racially inferior Slavic populations would be part of a grand plan of Germanization and economic exploitation lasting well beyond the expected military victory. In a not so dissimilar way, Putin has called for the denazification of Ukraine by a form of regime change, or as the state-owned news agency RIA Novosti has called it, de-Ukrainization. The similarity here runs further with the focus on Russification, by incorporating the annexed 4 areas into Russia and the constant focus on the will of the Russian-speaking peoples of the area. This screams Hitler's demands for Lebensraum for the Germanic people of Europe during his time. Then of course there is the inevitable economic exploitation with the removal of grains, livestock etc. to the Russian-controlled areas, if not the motherland itself, and the destruction of that which they cannot take. Regardless of recent economic and political cooperation, the Soviet Union was regarded as the natural enemy of Nazi Germany and a key strategic objective. The same could be said for how Putin perceives Ukraine, with its size and shift to the west unlocking its economic potential. In his mind, it had become a threat or an opportunity that he couldn't ignore. As we all know, Operation Barbarossa would have a very positive start for the Germans, where hundreds of thousands of prisoners and casualties would be inflicted on the Russian army. Despite all of this, and for many reasons that we will discuss and compare to Putin's special operation, it was not to be. Had Putin even considered Hitler's efforts in Russia, things may have been different in Ukraine. So let's get into the failures of the Nazis in Russia and how they compare to our potato-in-chief. The first and most important reason was the poor strategic planning. The Germans had zero plans in place for the long-term occupation and invasion of this massive country. They also assumed incorrectly that it would be over quickly, and that after suffering a series of shock defeats the Soviets would simply capitulate. The vast distances, logistical issues and the resolve of the Russians started to have a significant attritional impact on the German forces, which could not be sustained. I hope this is starting to sound familiar, because it is exactly what has happened to Putin. He thought that his men would swing down from Belarus, sack Kiev and cut off the head of the Ukrainian government. It would all be over in a fortnight. There has been zero planning for the drawn-out attritional war that has unfolded, and the similarity to the fortunes of the Nazi war machine is striking. This was best shown by the long convoy traffic jam that developed north of Kiev in the early day of the invasion and that subsequently was destroyed, or simply vanished. Then you had the impact of Hitler's direct meddling in the Russian war. Some of his moves were considered successful, like his switching of the main thrust from the Central Front to Leningrad in the north and Ukraine in the south. This was militarily sensible given the weakness of Army Group Center after the Smolensk battles and the threats to its flanks. Indeed, the diversion worked in the Germans' favor since it surprised the Soviets and resulted in the destruction of huge Soviet forces around Kiev. However, what it also did was to throw away any chance of an outright victory, in terms of sacking Moscow. Sources in the Pentagon have raised the point that as their performance has become more dire, so Putin has taken a more hands-on approach to the invasion, with him making decisions at the level of colonel. This is extreme micromanaging at a level that is dangerous, not just for the men on the ground but the Russian war effort in general. German intelligence was a shambles in Barbarossa and played a massive part in its failure. Due to Stalin's purges of the late 1930s, which removed thousands of its officer-class, German intelligence had viewed the Russian army with contempt. Its poor performance against the Finns in the winter of 1939 to 1940 also encouraged the Germans. Soviet industry was thought to be incapable of producing modern weapons. Most importantly, Russian troop numbers and fighting strength were always underestimated, so that despite the losses inflicted in early encirclement battles, there was always new troops available to plug the gaps. Even when the much-vaunted Operation Typhoon ground to a halt in early December, the Germans still chose to believe that the Soviets had nothing left to stage a counterattack. If Putin and his generals had to step back for a second, even they would admit that they thought nothing of the Ukrainian armed forces and that they underestimated its resolve, or how long it would take to defeat them. The Soviet army would establish a superiority in arms as the war progressed, turning out the vaunted T-34 tank and Yak-3 aircraft. In contrast, the new German tanks struggled with reliability and were unsuited to the Russian conditions. Putin must have known that the world would flood to support Ukraine, and in so doing deliver them weaponry far superior to the old Soviet-era stock being fielded by the Russians, or did he? Needless to say, with HIMARS, NLAW, and Javelin, but to name a few, the Russian army has been overtaken on the battlefield and are now at a significant disadvantage. The Germans struggled with massive logistical problems throughout Barbarossa. This resulted in pretty much a lack of everything down to winter jackets for the troops. This can be a morale game changer and cause all manner of problems for the battle readiness of the formations. One of the critical failings was the army's reliance on horse-drawn carts and a complete lack of lorries and other troop-carrying vehicles. This would become far more of a problem during poor weather. As discussed with Putin's expectation of a blitzkrieg through Ukraine, he never established proper logistical planning and to that extent recently fired the general in charge. There have been reports of troops landing without proper food, water, and ammunition. Troops being expected to sleep rough without sleeping bags, and of course a lack of weapons and personal body armor. This lack of care affects your troops in ways that cannot be imagined. Frankly, having been on the front lines myself, I can tell you that the quickest way to defeat is through your men's feet. Fresh socks are a must. This is an example of the frustration felt by his men. A recently created guards unit complaining on camera about the lack of APCs, with the current ratio in that unit being 80 men to 1 armored personal carrier. Having the sad situation of them having to ride completely unprotected on top of a brightly colored trucks. Then of course there is the resistance of the Russian army to Hitler's invasion. Hitler's announcement that the war in the East was one of annihilation, and Stalin's call to defend Mother Russia, rather than his own regime, gave the ordinary Russian soldier every reason to battle to the death. The Russian soldier was found to be a hardy and resilient foe, and quickly gained the respect of the majority of German frontline troops. No Western enemy would come close to the Soviets in sheer staying power. In stark contrast, the men in Putin's army are not convinced of why they are in Ukraine. In fact, early reports in the conflict talk of conscripts being told they were on a training exercise. There is a complete lack of belief in Putin's war effort, and to be clear, he has made it his war effort. This affects morale and the will to fight. On the positive side, the Ukrainians have been given every reason to resist. They are a determined and hard-working foe and very prepared to die for their freedom. They are an enemy that Putin will find difficult to defeat, much like Hitler did during Operation Barbarossa.